During the previous lesson that we have been able to discuss the different economic stages of man. In that particular lesson, we have been able to find out how humankind progressed from the hunting and gathering stage to the nomadic stages up until the modern economic activities of man.
Just like any other society, the Philippines underwent the same economic stages. In this lesson, we will look into the historical development of our economy.
We will discuss how our present economic system was formed as a result of social, cultural, historical, and political events in the Philippines from the pre-Spanish period to the era of global influences.
History as a discipline gives us an idea of how our present economic system came to be. From records and artifacts from the Spanish, American, and Japanese colonial period to oral traditions and other primary sources from the pre-colonial period, we can get a clear picture of how our economy began and developed into what it is today.
Between 900 and 1500 AD, before the Western colonizers came to the Philippines, Filipinos already have an active economic life which is centered on agriculture. They have already gone from being a hunting, gathering, and pastoral society by mastering agricultural skills and learning how to manufacture goods from their produce or offering human services.
One important industry is fishing, which developed due to the Filipinos' mastery of shipbuilding. By building large seaworthy vessels, they were able to fish in waters beyond the archipelago's territory and trade their goods with other Southeast Asian civilizations such as Ming Dynasty of China, Indonesia's Majapahit and Srivijayan empires, and Vietnam's Annamese and Champan empires.
To trade goods with these empires, early Filipinos developed some minor industries that manufactured or produced these goods. These include mat and basket weaving, mining, gold and iron smelting, ceramic making, hunting of edible birds' nests, ornament making, and tanning of animal skin for clothing and tools.
By trading goods with other civilizations, early Filipinos were able to import certain goods for their own consumption. These goods include glass, porcelain, gold, perfume, vases, needles, silk, fishing rods, umbrellas, rattan baskets, pots, and bracelets made of beads.
However, the most important industry during the pre-colonial period is farming. Since there was no concept of private property yet at this time, Filipinos possessed land through their ability to cultivate it. This right is called usufruct rights. If a person can continuously cultivate a piece of land, this becomes his/her possession, which can be passed on to the descendants. However, if one cannot cultivate the said land for a long period of time, it can be claimed by another person who manages to cultivate it. Hence, there is no concept of absentee land ownership.
Early Filipino farmers engaged in the kainan system. This involves slashing and burning a part of the forest in order to clear it for planting. Just like other civilizations, the Filipinos also have an irrigation system which involves the transfer of water from rivers to farmland. Filipinos have also learned how to domesticate animals and use them in agriculture, such as the carabao or water buffalo, or sell their meat for food such as chickens, goats, pigs, and cows. Rice and cassava were important products, for they are the staple food at that time. But so is wine, which is derived from coconut palm or rice. Our local wines such as tuba and lambanog were already being produced during this period. Some farmers also engage in weaving of fibers such as abaca, pineapple, and coconut for use in shelter or clothing.
Looking at these historical events, what can you conclude about the economic way of life of Filipinos during the pre-colonial period?
The arrival of the Spaniards brought drastic changes to the economic way of life of Filipinos. The Spanish introduced their own version of Western feudalism called the encomienda system. Under this system, a piece of land was given as a reward to the king's soldiers who helped in conquering territories. These rewarded individuals became the encomenderos, whose lands were called the encomienda. The encomenderos collected taxes from those who cultivate the lands within the encomienda.
There were actually other ways of owning land during the Spanish period. Aside from the encomenderos, religious congregations such as the Dominicans and Augustinians owned large tracts of land, which they allowed farmers or inquilinos to rent in portions for cultivation. The Spanish elite living in the Philippines also owned land, as well as mestizos and rich Indios in the principales social class. Some ordinary Indios also owned lands which they inherited from their ancestors before the Spanish colonization.
Due to an increasing demand in Europe for specific agricultural products such as tobacco, sugarcane, hemp, and rice, the Spanish government established a number of policies to enable the Philippines to supply such demand. These policies are the monopoly system and the bandala. Under the monopoly system, specific places in the country are only allowed to produce a single kind of product. For example, Cagayan province was only allowed to produce tobacco, while the province of Negros was only allowed to produce sugarcane. The Spaniards then introduced the bandala system, wherein the native farmers were forced to sell their produce to the government at a set price. This means the Spanish can buy monopolized crops cheaper and then sell it to European merchants or to locals at a higher price, thus ensuring them of greater profits.
One may wonder, how did these economic policies affect native farmers? Well, during that time, farmers that rented small parcels didn't earn enough from agriculture due to the bandala and the monopoly systems. They barely had enough produce for their own consumption, because even the hoarding or storage of crops for personal consumption was actually prohibited.
Moreover, the native farmers were taxed heavily by their landlords. Their inability to pay rent meant revocation of their right to cultivate their land. Farmers who owned their land were forced to sell their land to richer families or to the government because they barely have capital to cultivate the land. The government, or rich landowners, forcibly grabbed land from farmers who refused to sell it. Thus, landless farmers suffered poverty, even greater than before.
To survive, some landless farmers and their families were forced to render services to rich families as household help. Most Filipinos, however, were forced to work for the government under the policy of the Polo y Servicios, wherein male citizens from the age of 16 to 60 are forced to work for a period of 15 to 40 days a year. To be exempted from this policy, however, one must pay the falia or the exemption fee.
The falia is just one of the many exorbitant fees and taxes collected by the Spanish colonial government. These include tributo or tribute, a direct tax paid by all subjects of the Spanish crown. The government also collected custom taxes on imported merchandise and exported goods. Moreover, taxes were levied on the purchase and use of specific goods such as tobacco, coconut wine, rice, sugar, and hemp, as well as vices such as cockfighting and chewing of betel nut.
Spain benefited greatly from its stiff taxation policy. It enabled the government to have capital for the establishment of trade expeditions, or actually loaned these capitals for private individuals who wanted to have some trade expeditions for themselves. These expeditions led to the establishment of the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade between the Philippines and Mexico. The galleon trade made the Philippines a major market for Asian goods that were very popular in Mexico and Spain. It also introduced the Philippines to New World products such as potatoes, corn, cocoa, peanuts, pineapple, and tobacco.
How can merchants participate in the galleon trade? A merchant must have a ticket called boleta, which costs around 250 Mexican pesos in order to engage in galleon trade. Members of the Spanish administration, their friends, their widows, and the clergy were automatically given a boleta. Merchants who have boletas but do not have enough capital to engage in trade sold their boletas to other merchants for a higher fee. Merchants who didn't have enough capital to buy boletas borrowed money from the Obras Pias, an early banking institution run by the Spanish friars using money collected from the church activities.
By the turn of the 19th century, the Philippines emerged as the leading market in Asia for both Oriental and Western goods because of the galleon trading and through the remarkable economic policies of then Governor General Jose Basco y Vargas. The illustrious governor was assisted by the Sociedad Económico de los Amigos del Pay, an organization of Spanish and Mestizo merchants with the intent of developing Philippine economy through reforms and modernization. The society opened an agricultural school, provided scholarships to Filipinos who wanted to study the art of dyeing, and offered free training on cotton weaving. To encourage higher agricultural output, the society imported heavy machinery from Europe and provided incentives to rice farmers.
However, Vargas's economic reforms and modernization weren't continued by his successors. By 1815, the galleon trade had ended with the Mexican Declaration of Independence, and direct trade with Spain had to be established. The Spanish crown established the Real Compañía de Filipinas for this purpose, hoping to mimic the success of the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade. To encourage participation from Filipino merchants, the Compañía did not impose levies on Philippine goods entering Spain. However, most Filipino merchants still preferred trade with Mexico and did not cooperate. This, as well as the mismanagement of the Compañía's affairs, led to its demise. Nevertheless, the Compañía succeeded in opening Manila to world trade.
As the 20th century approached, the Spanish colonial Philippines was remarkably ahead than its Southeast Asian neighbors in terms of technology. By the 1900s, it had the first telegraph line, the first railway line, and even the first telephone line in the region. With the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, the Philippines enjoyed greater access to liberal ideas from Europe, ideas which Filipinos would use in their armed revolution to end 333 years of Spanish rule.
With these historical developments, how do you think Filipinos benefited economically from 333 years of Spanish rule?
The turn of the 20th century brought the Philippines away from the hands of one colonizer to the cradle of another, the Americans. After the Spanish-American War, Spain relinquished its claims over the Philippines for a total of $20 million during the Treaty of Paris, and the United States ultimately won for itself an economic as well as political foothold in Asia.
If the Spanish brought with them their mercantilist economic policies when they first arrived in the country, the Americans brought with them their ideas on free trade. This meant that the United States and the Philippines would have no trade barriers such as tariffs in the importation and exportation of each other's goods.
To implement their economic liberalization scheme in the Philippines, the United States Congress passed a number of laws. In 1909, the Payne-Aldrich Act was passed allowing for the importation of American goods to the Philippines without tariffs and quotas. In 1913, the Underwood-Simmons Act tried to realize the essence of free trade between the U.S. and the Philippines. It prevented the Philippine products with 20% foreign raw materials from entering the American market. With the passage of the Tidings-McDuffie Law in 1934, the Philippines became a Commonwealth territory of the United States, thus further solidifying free trade between the two countries.
What are the effects of economic liberalization in the Philippines? Positively, the Philippines progressed economically due to a much more organized financial institution which made credit even more available for importers and exporters. This, combined with the improvement in transportation and communication, allowed commerce to become widespread. For the first time, the volume and value of Philippine goods produced increased.
On the negative side, however, economic liberalization proved to be a one-sided affair, with the United States benefiting largely from the dismantling of trade barriers. The US flooded our country with imported goods, thereby making it difficult for locally made goods to compete with cheaply manufactured American goods. Our patronage of these important goods led to the development of colonial mentality and promoted heavy economic dependency on the United States.
With these historical developments, do you think the Philippines can still benefit from current free trade practices?
The Second World War swept American rule in the Philippines by storm and swiftly but briefly led the Japanese occupation of the archipelago. Since it was wartime, there were drastic economic policies and changes during this period of our economic history.
The Japanese period is characterized economically by the word shortage. The use of our country's raw materials for wartime needs instead of productive use led to a limited supply of consumer goods and high inflation rates. Shortage of rice, coconut oil, vegetable lard, soap, clothing, and livestock were reported during the Japanese period. With the substantially declining production of consumer goods, the Japanese had to resort to rationing of prime commodities in order to feed the nation. They tightly controlled the price of commodities in order to prevent supplies from declining and affecting the war effort.
But the Filipinos, resourceful as ever, managed to go around the shortage through various practices. The Filipinos learned how to buy and sell or use rationed goods, thereby creating a niche or black market. This, however, led to profiteering by some of scrupulous Filipinos. Small parcels of land such as garden plots and even clay pots were planted with vegetables or fruit-bearing plants so families can have something to eat.
With the Japanese controlling the price of consumer goods, producers were reluctant to operate because of the very little profit they can reap. Eventually, they would close, leading to massive unemployment and a reduction of government revenues from taxed commodities. To save money, the Central Administrative Organization imposed the lowering of salaries of government employees, the increase in contributions to government insurance schemes, and imposing of new sales and luxury taxes. It also encouraged gambling in the form of cockfighting, horse racing, high alay, among others, to reel in tax money for use in the war effort.
In the end, it was very clear that despite Japanese criticism of American economic policies and its encouragement of self-sufficiency and industrialization, they only wanted to use the Philippines as a resource pot to drive their war efforts as well as Japan's own development. Since the Philippines was essentially an agricultural country at that time, her industrial production was limited, which exacerbated Japan's problem during the war and thus leading to its eventual defeat.
From its experiences during 333 years of Spanish rule, 50 years of American occupation, and 4 years as a Japanese garrison, the Philippines ripened in economic knowledge and experience, which would prove to be beneficial to the country during its republic years up to the present.
Looking now at our country's current economic boom, we can realize how our country is reaping the fruits of its rich economic history as well as benefiting from the economic choices and sacrifices of our ancestors. The Philippines will never be in this position right now if not for thousands of years of prolific and at times horrific economic activity.